Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 21st day of February in the year of our Lord, 2025. I will be talking about the remarks of Vice President Vance at the annual Munich Security Conference, as well as the European response to those remarks. In addition, I will talk a little about DOGE, or DOGE if you prefer, and its examination of the military-industrial complex, or MIC. Yes, J.D. Vance spoke to Europeans about their relationship with the U.S. at the annual Munich Security Conference, which had as its main emphasis the U.S. role as the guarantor of European security in the European and American roles in Ukraine. He called the Europeans out for censoring their people and for allowing third world migrants to destroy their communities. He seemed to indicate that these policies were not in the best interest of the European people, and they also hindered our relationship with the European people. I will point out that those have also been the policies of the United States for at least 4 years, and in part for all the years since 9/11, but the European elite bought into what the Biden administration was selling them. They bought it hook, line, and sinker, it seems. I suppose he was telling Europe that the new sheriff in the U.S. believes in free speech and in preserving the quality of life for the American people. The subjects that Vance discussed in his speech were, in my view, an admission that the empire is in trouble and changes have to be made right now to save a free republic for our children. The debt faced by the country will lead to ultimate collapse and chaos, and something must be done to change course or at least slow the process of that looming disaster. The content of his speech acknowledged that reality without really saying it out loud, taking all the bloated, wasteful departments, all the wasteful people who are supposed to be working for the federal government into account. The MIC stands out, presents itself head and shoulders above all the others. It fails every audit, purports to tell us that we don't even have a right to ask where all the money goes because it's just none of our business, I guess. It spends trillions, has trillions that it admits to having no knowledge of. The federal government, with more than $36 trillion as debt, seems to have no other choice but to keep feeding the monster. Vance was trying to tell the European elites that this administration understands the problem and is not afraid to confront it. The money is real, isn't it? Those who receive it know where it comes from. They know where it goes, don't they? They have used it to buy almost every member of the House and Senate. Once again, they use our money in a never-ending cycle to generate more revenue from the people who create it, the American people, with their labor extracted from them by these corrupt people, and organizations are forced to keep feeding this monster. So the cycle continues. It's all apparently just a giant, terrible scam, always has been. But we are constantly brainwashed, or at least propagandized, to accept the scam as real and as necessary. It's a myth, but a sacred myth, held close to the American heart. U.S. troops, our sons and daughters, are stationed all over the world, manning bases in some 700 places around the world, but the number is just an approximate guess because nobody seems to know for certain how many there are. They involve themselves in almost every conflict that comes along, many of which the federal government creates, either deliberately or through stupidity and bumbling. These power brokers, bought and paid for, play the grand game on the grand chessboard at a cost to the American people of an admitted $1 trillion per year. Trillions more go unaccounted for, as I previously mentioned. We are told constantly that it all makes us safe and free. So often the opposite is true. When I was a Marine Corps officer more than 50 years ago, we young officers were told in classrooms that we were the enforcement arm of American foreign policy, which was determined by our civilian leadership. Ours was not to question orders, but to follow them to the letter and carry out the foreign policy decisions of leadership. The troops, on the other hand, were told nothing, but they were expected to fight hard for freedom and for the safety of their loved ones. They were comforted by the knowledge that their sacrifice made the safety and freedom of their parents, wives, girlfriends, possible. It was all just a scam created by horrible people who remained insulated from the sacrifice of the battlefield and from the carnage they created. Maybe, just maybe, this administration has seen and understands what has been happening and has decided to put their ravenous beast on a diet. The firepower industry, the MIC, seems to be under attack by this new administration. The DOGE team has been given the Pentagon, the holy ground of the MIC, as a place to audit and review. In other words, sacred cows are now on the altar if the people can just get past party bickering and past the propaganda and support the examination wherever it leads. The Pentagon has been directed to turn over a list of probationary employees with an expectation that many could be laid off. In case you don't know, folks, probationary employees are those with only 1 year or less on the job. In other words, they know when hired that they are on probation for a year and could be kept or let go at any time. Here is a quote from old friend Bill Bonner, which illustrates what Musk might say to the Pentagon brass. Quote, "We're here to root out waste, no useless aircraft, no easily sunk ships. Close unnecessary bases, stop useless weapons development, fire some of the 3 million people who get our paychecks, tighten our belts, cancel our beach house plans." Yeah, that's right. What about our enemies? What enemies? You know perfectly well there are no country on earth capable of crossing the ocean with a viable armada. They'd be wiped out by missiles and bombers before even leaving port. Okay, well, what about Russia, China, and the terrorists? Are you kidding? Russia has a tiny economy. Chinese economy depends on selling stuff to Americans, not attacking them. And terrorists have never been anything more than a fake enemy, end quote. Okay, that might happen, but it's one thing to cut spending by U.S. aid. But when you start cutting spending for the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force, that's a whole different level of resistance, folks. I wonder if you know the last time the Pentagon had its budget cut. Well, it was right after World War II, about 80 years ago. When the troops came home, they were demobilized. General Eisenhower, who I will argue knew more about war and military in general than any president since, cut 30% off the Department of Defense. That was before the MIC took over the country and became its symbol, its very definition, gained control of both political parties. I wonder if any of this will work out well enough to head off the coming disaster. I wonder, folks. The president seems to understand the problem and has taken steps to tighten the nation's burden of political operatives known as four-star officers. Those generals and admirals gained four-star rank in many cases by playing the game, playing it well, feeding the beast, who in turn feeds them. So Vance called the Europeans out for censoring their people and for abandoning their people to criminal migrants. He was right to do so. Despite all the screaming, things are so bad in Europe right now regarding its migrant population that it is only a slight exaggeration to say that in Sweden, not only is the rape of thousands of young Swedish girls by migrants not a crime, but the reporting of rape, the complaining about rape, are considered to be worse crimes than the rapes. I suppose the censoring of speech about reporting and complaining was at least part of Vance's agenda. At least I hope it was. The European politicians in attendance stated to reporters after the speech that they now see America as an adversary. So, listening to your own people, the ones you are elected or appointed to serve, instead of censoring their complaints as somehow seen and treated as a threat to democracy. Once again, that is the opposite of the truth. By its very nature, democracy, or the will of the people, is hindered or extinguished. One reporter said that a prominent German politician told him that the speech was a direct attack on European democracy. A senior diplomat told the same reporter, quote, "It's clear now Europe is alone," end quote. This is just me, folks, but I suspect the European democracy they are so afraid of criticizing is in reality unelected bureaucrats in Brussels. Vance himself, when talking later about the speech and the reaction to it, said, quote, The transatlantic elite have created so many institutions to silence their own people and to delegitimize the beliefs of the public. Of course, the Biden administration was the worst offender, end quote. Yes, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, I was waiting for you to acknowledge what we in America have done, essentially the same thing you are criticizing the Europeans for, I suppose. The difference is that the administration you serve has pledged to change that policy. The Munich speech created a firestorm of a different variety. The German defense minister can be seen on the video after the speech visibly crying at the podium. The minister's name is Boris Pistorius, and he quickly let the U.S. know that he was not happy. Quote, this democracy was just called into question by the U.S. Vice President. Not just German democracy, but that of Europe as a whole. As I understand him correctly, he compares the condition of Europe with what prevails in some authoritarian regimes. This is not acceptable. This is not the Europe where I live, end quote. Well, Minister, with all due respect, my guess is that the Europe you live in is not the one the people who are overrun with rampant criminality live in. I doubt very seriously, Minister, if you go to bed at night terrified that your 12-year-old daughter might be gang raped by criminals invited into your country by the European democracy, but many of your people are so terrified of that prospect. The speech, I suspect, hit a little closer to home than anyone imagined. He noted for his audience numerous examples, including social media censorship, arresting people for sharing unpopular opinions, and the supporting of overturning election results in Romania based on an alleged online Russian spending campaign. Remember last week when I blamed the Romanian election debacle on the U.S. by way of U.S. aid? I still do, but apparently the U.S. used its European proxies to do it. Trump and Vance haven't done any of this stuff, so they're criticizing the Europeans knowing that the Biden administration, whoever the president actually was, did the same and even worse. For example, if the Biden administration, and it appears the president personally ordered it, hadn't destroyed the Nord Stream pipeline, then Trump would not be able to threaten the Europeans with tariffs unless they buy more American oil and gas. They would instead have plenty of inexpensive Russian gas. They would have no need to buy ours. There would be a more peaceful Europe, as Europe would have been in a position of cooperation with Russia rather than constantly in a military conflict. That brings up the whole question of Ukraine, where this administration has let it be known that acknowledgement of reality is the order of the day. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced and acknowledged this is a multipolar world. That belief is in a unipolar world run by America has been deep state, unquestionable policy since 1990. So that acknowledgement is no small thing, folks. The Secretary of Defense acknowledged publicly that Ukraine cannot enter NATO, as Zelensky continues to demand. When Trump called Putin and talked about standing down from war and reducing military spending, it was perhaps the most important international call since JFK spoke to Khrushchev. The core demands of Putin's 2007 speech at the Munich Conference, the same Munich Conference, setting out the possibility of peace, have now all been met or are ongoing. It has been approximately 35 years since the Soviet Union collapsed, and perhaps now we will put aside the grand chessboard, start keeping our word to each other. Finally, folks, the greatest thing any president has said to us in many years is Trump's words outlining his desire to have a future meeting with the leaders of Russia and China. Quote, one of the first meetings I want to have is with President Xi of China, President Putin of Russia. I want to say, let's cut our military budget in half, and we can do that, end quote. At least that's the way I see it. Until next time, folks, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.